Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're looking at the 1922 FA Cup final, a positively bad match. So, this century-old football game was supposed to be this majestic display of sport, right? But it actually ended up making history for all the wrong reasons. We've got Huddersfield Town squaring off against Preston North End. On paper, this was a classic Yorkshire-Lancashire Roses clash. It promised excitement, it promised drama. But, well, the reality on the pitch was something entirely different. It was a game that literally changed the football rulebook forever. It launched a legendary sporting dynasty, and yet it was almost universally despised by anyone who actually had the misfortune of watching it. To say the press absolutely loathed this game would be a huge understatement. I mean, look at this quote. The Daily Telegraph reporter called it positively bad, in every particular the worst I have witnessed. They didn't mince words. This wasn't just some boring snooze-fest 0-0 draw. It was an actively ugly spectacle. Other journalists from the era completely ripped into it, calling it one of the worst in the competition's history. The Sunday Times called it so much of a mix-up and a muddle. Even the Football Association, the FA itself, had to step in and officially express concern about the players' conduct. So you've got to wonder, how on earth did a cup final get so bad that the FA had to scold the teams like naughty schoolchildren? Well, to really set the scene, the scale of this event was just massive. We're talking 53,000 fans packing into Stamford Bridge on a warm April afternoon. Now, fun fact, this was actually the very last FA Cup final played at Stamford Bridge before the event moved to the brand new Wembley Stadium the very next year. And those 53,000 fans, they generated a whopping £10,551 in gate receipts. To put that into perspective, that was a massive, massive sum for 1922. The stadium could hold 85,000, so it wasn't completely packed to the rafters. And historians point out that the pitch was heavily used and in pretty awful condition, which, kind of foreshadows the super messy football we're about to talk about. Adding to the whole spectacle, the prestige of the match was sky high because of a royal presence. The guest of honor was the Duke of York. Normally, King George V would be there for a match of this magnitude, but he was absent due to the recent passing of Lord Leopold Mountbatten. So in his place, the Duke of York shows up, accompanied by Prince George. And honestly, having literal royalty watching from the stands makes the gritty, rule-breaking football that followed so ironically hilarious. You just have to imagine the Duke of York sitting there, politely applauding, while players are out there just hacking at each other's shins in the mud. Okay, let's look at who was competing for the cup, because the tension before kickoff was absolutely palpable. On one side, you have Huddersfield Town. They were a pretty young club, only founded in 1908. And just 3 years prior, in 1919, they were nearly dissolved thanks to an illegal payment scandal. They even barely survived a threat to merge with the newly formed Leeds United. But they bounced back, and they were managed by the visionary Herbert Chapman. Funnily enough, Chapman's own lifetime ban from that exact same scandal had just been overturned. On the flip side, we have Preston North End, a historic club, the 1889 Cup winners, led by their 35-year-old veteran captain Joe McCall. But Preston's recent form was a disaster. They literally had 0 away league wins all season leading up to the final. 0. But, cup football is a whole different beast. Despite that terrible league form, Preston's road to the final was a true underdog's journey. They were like a completely different team in the FA Cup. In round 1, they beat Wolves 3-0. Round 2, they took down Newcastle 3-1. In the quarterfinals, they survived a grueling extra-time replay to beat Arsenal. And then, in the semifinals, they defeated the cup holders themselves, Tottenham, 2-1. So they had taken down absolute giants to reach their first final in 33 years. They had all the momentum of a team destined for glory. Destiny, however, took a total backseat to sheer brutality once that whistle blew. The game immediately degenerated into a gritty, foul-heavy muddle. 0 goal-scoring chances, like nothing. One match reporter noted that there were, quote, 2 of the most villainous fouls imaginable committed really early on. To counter Preston's attack, Huddersfield's manager actually dropped his captain into a much deeper defensive role. It was a pretty wild tactical novelty at the time that essentially parked the bus and choked the life out of the game even further. So the first half ended scoreless, tedious, and just incredibly rough. So what does this all mean for the outcome? Well, the entire match, and really its place in football history, hinged on a single, highly controversial moment halfway through the second half. It leads everyone to ask this massive question. Was it actually a penalty? With the game completely deadlocked in this ugly physical stalemate, Huddersfield's outside left Billy Smith managed to dribble past Preston's right back, Tom Hamilton. and Hamilton, in a completely desperate bid to stop him, tripped Smith from behind. Now, the crucial point here is that Hamilton definitely, clearly fouled Smith. There's no debating that. But here is the massive catch. The foul, the actual trip, happened outside the penalty area. But because of his momentum, Billy Smith went tumbling and fell inside the box. Despite furious, and I mean furious, protests from the Preston players, the referee pointed straight to the spot. Penalty awarded to Huddersfield for a foul that technically started outside the box. Okay, now we get to my absolute favorite part of this whole story. The man tasked with stopping that highly disputed penalty was Preston's goalkeeper, James Mitchell. And this guy was quite the character. He was an eccentric amateur who had actually played for Great Britain at the 1920 Olympics, but he is most famous for his on-pitch fashion. Mitchell uniquely wore a bandeau, like a bandana, around his head, and to this day he remains the only player to ever wear actual spectacles, like full-on glasses, during an FA Cup final. So faced with this massively high-pressure penalty, Mitchell decides that traditional goalkeeping just isn't going to cut it today. In a desperate bid to distract the kicker, he starts waving his arms and jumping wildly on the goal line. Contemporary reports described him as jumping like a circus clown and performing a maneuver of dervish leaps. I mean, can you imagine? He was doing absolutely everything in his power to break Billy Smith's concentration, totally cementing this match's bizarre legacy. Well, it didn't work. Despite the absolute circus act on the goal line, Billy Smith completely ignored the distraction. He kept his cool, shot the ball to the goalkeeper's right, and scored. Huddersfield held on to that 1-0 lead, and the match finished without Preston creating any real chances. The Duke of York handed the trophy over to Huddersfield, concluding what officially became the first FA Cup final ever to be decided by a solitary penalty goal. The ripple effects of this one famously ugly game were honestly monumental. First off, a huge rule change. Because of James Mitchell's crazy antics, goalkeepers were officially banned from moving to distract penalty kickers before the ball was struck. Second, a dynasty was born. Building on this cup win, Huddersfield, under Herbert Chapman, became the first team to ever win 3 successive league titles. They totally dominated the 1920s. And third, Preston's fall. For Preston, the heartbreak really lingered. Their form never recovered, and they were relegated to the second division just a few years later in 1925. But I want to leave you with this final thought. 16 years later, in 1938, these exact 2 teams met again in the FA Cup final. And what happened? Preston took the cup, winning 1-0 via their very own highly disputed penalty. It's wild, right? It really makes you wonder, is historical karma actually a real, tangible force on the football pitch? The 1922 FA Cup final might have been a terrible 90 minutes of football, but its bizarre story, rule-changing consequences, and karmic conclusion make it a completely unforgettable piece of sports history. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the rules.